Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Géraldine Amiel, and I'm the Paris bureau chief for Bloomberg News. And I'm very fortunate to be here. I have to thank Nicolas Rémillard and Cédric Muller for that. Thank you. So we're talking about here the green recovery and the need to do this very fastly in a speedy manner. And that's true that we are still faced with a lasting, nasty health situation. And it will be easy for some to claim that the ensuing economic crisis should take precedence beyond, of course, tackling the pandemic. But then the climate warming is not going anywhere, is it? And actually, if anything, the health crisis creates somehow, I would say, an opportunity for environmental actions. It makes them all the more necessary to transform our our industries, and embrace low carbon emission activities. It seems that the time is ripe. Why am I saying this? Because their money is flowing, obviously, to address the economic crisis, with the central banks being extremely involved, the EU deciding an unprecedented common stimulus, and as well as the US, hopefully very soon. And I'm very, very fortunate to have with me Jean-Pierre Clamadieu, who's the chairman of ENGIE. Monsieur Clamadieu, welcome, bienvenue. Later, once we've shared a little bit of your vision, we will be having interventions by Glenn Hutchins, who's from the Brookings institutions. We will have John Beck as well, the chairman of ECON, Arnold, the CEO of Carnival Corporation, and last but not least, Afsaneh Beschloss. She's the CEO of RockCreek Group, and she will intervene. So first of all, let me start with you, Monsieur Clamadieu, and once again, thank you very much for being here. And that's very interesting because ENGIE, a few years ago, had really the intuition that green services would be key. They would be key to help households address their energy bill. They would be key to companies to help curb their carbon emissions. You were really ahead of your time. Where do you stand right now?
We realized a few years ago that as a large utility, as a large producer of energy, as a large transporter of energy, we had to do more than just the traditional activities of a utility, and that we had to get closer to our customers, being household, being local government, being industries, and help them go through this energy transition and help them consume less energy or consume energy better. And it's something which is still a very important element of our strategy. We see our decarbonization strategy being twofold. Improve our footprint, and we still have a lot to do in this direction. Very significant opportunity to invest in renewable, still a few fossil fuel assets that we need to take care of. And secondfold, work very, very closely with our customers to help them consume less energy. So this is something that we have started 5-6 years ago, and this continues to be the key element of our strategy.
But I was just wondering, initially, there was not so much demand, and it looked like customers were a bit shy. So how did you make them aware, or did the situation change that much that suddenly it became more relevant to their eyes?
Maybe we'll discuss later the impact of this current crisis, but pre-COVID crisis, we've seen big changes. If I take the example of the large industries using data servers, the GAFA, for example, these companies have made tremendous commitment to go for renewable energy, to go for zero carbon scenario. And this created a lot of opportunities for a company like us to come and help them develop these scenarios. But if you go to a lot more industries, I used to be in the chemical industry for many years, I've seen an industry, a large user of energy, a large producer of CO2, I've seen this industry changing. And now all the large chemical industries have also developed their zero carbon scenario. So this is changing, and the challenge for ENGIE is to make sure that we can bring to our customers, that we can bring to our partners, because more and more customers are becoming partners when we think of these types of long-term scenarios. We need to bring them the solutions which makes this type of transition affordable.
But I was just wondering, were you part of a dialogue? You said that they were aware way before this current crisis that they needed to change the way they were operating. So how did you foster that? Did ENGIE foster that? What was the relationship?
I think what we've been able to do is to demonstrate that this transition was and is even more today feasible. But it's a transition which can be implemented and with a limited impact on their profitability. And again, I was on the side of the consumer of energy when I was in the chemical industry. We had a lot of ambition, but the key question was, is it possible? And the answer today is yes. Today, you can, even if you are if you're an industry which is a large consumer of power, you have the ability to access renewable energy 24/7, and in most circumstances, it's not true everywhere around the globe, but in most circumstances, in a competitive way. And this is what ENGIE brought to the table, this ability to put in place this plan in a competitive way without impacting the profitability of these businesses. But if you think of household, completely different situation. There too, the challenge is to help household make the investments that could lower their energy bill and at the same time contribute to a better environment. And this is difficult because this concept of investment payback is something which is not at all, it's something on which households are not at all familiar. And the savoir-faire, the ability of ENGIE is to bring to our customers these types of package where we say, we can help you change your gas heating system and it will be paid by a reduction of your energy bill. So these are all this very different approach that we have developed, which makes energy transition today a reality. And again, I think the COVID crisis has accelerated the willingness and the need to make this energy transition as quick and as effective as possible.
Let's discuss about that. You know, as I said earlier, there's a stimulus package coming up from the European Union, and very unprecedented one for the way it's been put together. There seem to be some delays. Hopefully the US will have also some stimulus package coming up. It's being discussed. Though if I understand well, your position is that there should be no delay, that measures in favor of a low carbon economy should be implemented as soon as possible. Why is that? Why are we in such a hurry beyond the fact that it was really hot last summer?
In fact, two reasons. First, we are in an economic situation which is very challenging, and stimulus package has to hit the ground as quickly and as effectively as possible. We need to see people at work on project in the next few months. This is, I would say, the expected impact of these stimulus packages. Then, what was very good is that in most geographies, and especially in Europe, institutions, governments recognize that this stimulus package has to have a very strong focus on green transition. And yes, I think we need to move quickly. We've realized, thanks, if I can say that, to the COVID crisis, that indeed our world is very vulnerable. That events can happen which suddenly would put half of the humanity in confinement. So the climate change will be a very different type of challenge, but the impact on our societies, the impact on our way of living could be as significant and probably longer lasting, because there won't be anything like a vaccine for climate change. I mean, once the phenomena has reached a certain level, it will accelerate to a point which will make our planet very, very vulnerable. So I think the sense of urgency has emerged from this health crisis, and it's a second reason why we want to make sure, why it's necessary that these stimulus packages are indeed in place as quickly as possible. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge because in Europe, we have stimulus packages which are being put in place by governments, by national government. We have some support, significant support from the European Commission. All of this is a bit complex, a bit bureaucratic, and there is a need for quick action in this field.
You and I discussed in the spring, within the same forum, by the way. You and I discussed in the spring about that situation. It was very new to all of us. It was the first lockdown, at least in France, and you were already discussing about strategy, talking about. Has it changed? Has your strategy slightly changed now that we're in a second lockdown here in France and the pandemic goes on and climate warming hasn't gone anywhere? And have you changed anything perhaps you've yourself accelerated the implementation of yours?
In fact, at ENGIE, but again, I think COVID crisis was just a catalyst of this strategic update. But we've decided that there was a need for us to accelerate our development in two areas: renewable, because I think the crisis has made it even more obvious then there's huge opportunities for renewable around the globe. And we've seen a number of players willing to very significantly increase the amount of resources they are ready to commit to develop their positions in renewable. And we have decided at ENGIE also to accelerate very significantly and to increase our capital expenditure on renewable. And the second area of priority are infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and what we call urban energy infrastructure. We think that when we work with local governments on their low carbon scenario, we realize that district heating, district cooling, EV charging network, smart cities, which is a way to integrate all of these needs, are in great demand, and we want to have the resources to support local governments we partner with on these various elements. So we have announced at the end of July that we would accelerate and that we were willing to increase our investment by about 8 billion euros, so quite significant, in the next few years, to make sure that we have the resources and the ability to meet demand in these two areas. So this is the adjustment we've made on our strategy, but very much in the direction of what we have done in the past 5 years, with the need for a bit more focus on a bit of a smaller footprint. We have decided in our service activities to focus on the ones which indeed relates to energy transition, which indeed relate to the optimization in the use of energy. And we are looking at a way to deal with other service activities which are very interesting, but probably a little bit further away from what's the core of ENGIE today, which is supporting our customers in their energy transition and making sure that our own footprint, as far as power generation is concerned, is getting greener and greener.
You have to forgive me for the next question, because after all, I'm a financial journalist. But when you say you want to accelerate your development in both renewables and energy infrastructures, could this mean consolidation, M&A, buying another entity that would bring you the expertise that you miss? Or do you have everything and it's more organically that you're...
Today, the priority is really organic growth. As far as renewable is concerned, we are convinced that the way to create value is indeed to develop new windmill farms, new photovoltaic field. So I'm not excluding M&A, but I'm seeing that as a second option, really the priority. And we've done that very well. In the past few years, we've connected more than 3 gigawatts of renewable power facilities onto the grid. The objective is to go from 3 gigawatt to 4 gigawatt very quickly, and I think that there will be opportunities for us to accelerate even further on this field.
So we talked about the stimuluses. There are many of them, and packages, and do you feel there are enough not only to foster an economic recovery, but to foster a green economic recovery, or do you think we should do more?
I will take a European perspective there. So I've seen France, Germany, and a number of other large countries putting in place this type of stimulus packages. Some alignment, but also some differences in priorities, which are to some extent understandable. This being said, I'm a strong supporter of Europe, and I think better alignment would be necessary. We've seen also the European Commission willing to support that. We've seen some breakthrough in terms of the type and the size of a package which can be put in place by the EU. We need that to move quickly. We are still in a situation where things are not completely ready. The bureaucratic piping is not there to make the money flowing onto the project. So once again, focus is move quickly and maybe identify a bit better priorities and make sure that there's alignment between countries, which would be stronger if we play together in the same direction. Is
this something that you share with your counterparts, for instance?
No, sure. I mean, in Germany, that's regarding Germany, and France and Germany have a lot of forum of discussion. But I could add probably Italy, Spain, and a few others, because we are part of the same
grid,
energy system grid. network, as we would call them, not to forget Belgium, by the way, which is an important country for ENGIE. So yes, we have these discussions. We see some alignment, but we can do better. I'm absolutely sure of this, and I think we should, on one hand, move faster, but not forget that coordination could make it more impactful. Because yes, we are talking big number when we look at stimulus packages, but when we compare that with what's needed to make the energy transition and the climate transition a success, we still have a way to go.
So what are the hurdles? Is there anyone resisting, or you talked about bureaucracy? Do you think governments are not helping enough, and how can we tackle this? I mean, beyond you discussing with your counterparts, and I suspect your interests are all aligned, as you said. So of course, how do you cajole everyone?
I think sometimes there's still a bit of a nationalistic approach of this. We want to be a bit different from what the other guys are doing, and this is true for any country. But let's take an example: hydrogen. I'm a strong believer in the fact that hydrogen will be an important part of the European energy system 10 years from now. And it can be a game changer because hydrogen has a lot of capabilities. It's a gas, and the gas can be stored and transported easily. And at the same time, it mixes very well with electricity because you can transform electricity into hydrogen, and you can transform back hydrogen into electricity. So it's really a product which can become an important element in the energy system. France has its hydrogen plan. Germany has its hydrogen plan. The EU has mentioned that they want to bring some support. And we are talking billions, 7 billion here, 9 billion there, 10 billion at the EU level. We need to align our efforts. To make hydrogen a viable candidate to transform our energy system, we need to work on hydrogen production, electrolysis. We need to work on hydrogen transportation, storage. By the way, it's where ENGIE has a lot to bring. And we need to work on the usage of hydrogen, probably heavy-duty transportation, industrial activities at first, and then much broader type of usage. And I still see a bit of difficulties to make sure that we frame the plan and then we act to make things happen.
Well, you mentioned European Union, and forgive me because I have a lot of mauvais esprit, as you know me. But then could the European competition law be an issue in that respect? How do you coordinate? How do you put everyone together doing the same thing or going into the same direction without at some point the European antitrust authority raising an eyebrow?
Europe has created a new instrument. I forgot the English acronym, but the French one is PIEC, Projet Européen d'Intérêt Commun, which is a way to make sure that these types of cooperation projects could be put in place for a common goal. It was first used for battery, and we've seen a couple of large battery for electric vehicle projects being developed in Europe within this framework. This framework is a great framework to develop hydrogen. And I was talking to Thierry Breton a couple of weeks ago. He's the commissioner in charge of a lot of things, by the way, and hydrogen is within his area of responsibility. We need to move fast. If we want hydrogen to be in our system 10 years from now, we need to have in the next couple of years real life demonstrators being put in place. We have seen a lot of tiny demonstrations here and there. We need to go to the next step. And again, coordination, alignment should make it possible.
One last question on the matter. Shouldn't we lead by example? Shouldn't you just decide, okay, I'll do it, and then no matter what, forget the coordination, and they'll see, and just not pay attention to what the rest is doing, and just
we are doing it, and we are companies like us, Total, Air Liquide. We have some car makers, we have some truck, we have a railway company. So we have a number of demonstrations here and there, and we know that it works. So now the challenge is to bring it to a next level and to start to develop systems. And for that, I think there's a need for some support.
Okay. So as I said earlier, we would have some interventions by honourable guests. And the first one is Glenn Hutchins from the Brookings Institution. He is also the co-founder of Silver Lake. And we're very fortunate to have him intervening here.
So, responding first to your question about how this crisis might create opportunity in creating a green economy, a lot of people have likened the COVID crisis to the climate crisis, in that it's something that if we had been better prepared, we would have been able to handle better. But on the other hand, I think the aftermath of it will be not unlike the aftermath of World War II, and can be something that's very constructive for our economies. In the United States, so the next big piece of legislation we anticipate passing will be a large infrastructure bill, I think, large stimulus bill that I would hope would include a large piece of infrastructure, and that infrastructure, certainly if Joe Biden is president, will be focused on the green economy. Biden has proposed a $1.7 trillion spend on the green economy over the next 10 years. Just like the public investment made after World War II in research and innovation led to huge economic growth and job growth in the United States, I think the investing in the green economy has the same opportunity to do that. An IMF study recently concluded that in advanced countries, each 1% of GDP in this kind of investment would raise growth by 0.4 to 1.5% annually and foster technological innovation. I think you'll see investments in kind of infrastructure to rebuild the nation, around buildings, water, transportation, energy infrastructure to enable them to withhold the changes for climate impacts. We'll be rebuilding roads, bridges, building electric grid and the water infrastructure to prevent, reduce, and withstand climate change. And this will also, in my view, create a new class of well-paying jobs and job training around climate-resilient industries. Things like coastal restoration, resilient infrastructure design, construction, and evaluation of things like bridges. Can they withstand high winds and high waters and storms and floods? Natural solutions such as tree plantings on a large scale to combat urban heat, and technological solutions to assess risk and protect people. All of this will add up to a whole host of new jobs, as well as a massive investment in the future of North America, which I think will both address today's crisis and lay the groundwork for enormous growth and prosperity in the future. Thank you for asking me to join you today, and I hope everybody stays safe and well.
We're indeed fortunate to have had Glenn's point of view, and do you have?
Well, I think it echoes very, very much what I was saying about Europe. We've seen something very interesting in the US for the past few years. We've seen corporate being very active in energy transition. We've seen local governments being very active in the energy transition in some part of the country, but the federal government was indeed looking elsewhere. So the challenge is to see what will happen. I think we have a president-elect which has made a lot of strong statements regarding this, and the fact that he wants to go back into the Paris Agreement on day one of his presidency is something which is indeed a very strong message. There's still a piece missing, which is the Senate, to figure whether there will be the space for these types of large infrastructure bill, which would create a lot of opportunities in North America. So I expect that indeed the president-elect will be in a position to launch this very large energy transition scenario. And maybe a second comment, if I may. Glenn was talking about workforce, and that's something very important, because behind this recovery plan, what do we expect? We expect jobs to be created in a situation where we are seeing in other parts of the economy job disappearing. And a very important element to make sure that we are successful is the ability to reskill workers. And this is also a comment that Glenn made: the ability to train people for the new jobs which will be created by the energy transition. Very simple element, something which is likely to create a large number of jobs here in Europe, is everything linked to the improvement of the insulation of buildings. This could be huge in terms of potential job opportunities. We lack today the competencies to do this type of activities. We do it at ENGIE, and we see all the challenges we have today to attract people who have the skills we need to make this type of activities. So yes, indeed, behind the energy transition packages that are being put in place, there is a very strong need to prepare people, to prepare workers to be able to execute the works which will be made possible by these stimulus packages.
As a reminder, the current president of the United States had pledged thousands of billions of investment in infrastructures when he took office. And the second point is, while we're here say that the EU should perhaps, and the governments should be more active and everything, at the same time, you're using the example of the United States, and they're not waiting for the federal government to help out. So I'm just kind of...
Yes, but I'm not saying that we are waiting by the way, in Europe or in the US. If you think, for example, of renewable, we've seen in the US very large development on renewables, very made possible by very significant investment by large corporations. In the US, renewable is not developed through state subsidies. It's developed through what we call PPA, Power Purchase Agreement, where a corporate will commit to buy renewable for a certain period of time in certain conditions. And this is how we finance the development of our windmill or photovoltaic field in the US. ENGIE is quite active in renewable in North America.
And briefly on your workforce point, so what do you do as you move along? You find out that new services, new technologies are being created. You need a new workforce, a new trained workforce. How do you do that? You train them?
We train them. I think we have developed a couple of centres de formation d'apprentis, vocational schools, to make sure that we can access the know-how that we need to do some activities linked to electrical or air conditioning installation. We have taken the commitment at ENGIE to have 10% of our total employees in France who are people in vocational training, apprentissage of various forms. It's a very significant number. It means about 8,000 people every year at ENGIE that are doing both school and working for the company part-time. And this is a very strong, very effective way to train people. But we need to make it at a much larger scale. And again, it's where government support or local government support is needed.
Okay. So our second intervention is from John Beck, and he's the chairman of AECON.
Good day. It's a pleasure to participate in the Paris conference, even if virtually. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Il y a un an, j'étais à Paris, à cette magnifique conférence en chair et en os, mais cette année, c'est en virtuel. As some of you may know, I've been working in the construction and infrastructure industry for over 50 years. As chairman of AECON, I keep a close eye on industry developments and global trends. It was about 8 years ago that I said, sustainability affects our bottom line in too many ways to count, and AECON will continually adapt and innovate to ensure we are aligned with our key stakeholders. At AECON, sustainability is built into our DNA, so much so that we didn't really overtly speak to the sustainable work we do every day. This year, we changed that and published our first annual sustainability report, of which we're extremely proud. We see the report as having two functions. One, tracking our corporate greenhouse gas emissions, energy usage, and other material sustainability metrics. And two, setting meaningful targets and goals. We use the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as a key framework. I think it is incredibly important that collectively goals be universal and global. Climate is interconnected, just as is the economy. The infrastructure AECON builds is critical in enabling society to adapt to a changing climate, transition to a lower carbon, a circular economy, and stay safe as the world endures an unprecedented global pandemic. The teams at AECON are always looking to the future, to being prepared and involved at the onset of emerging technologies such as hydrogen and fusion, geothermal, and by ensuring key alignments with existing infrastructure. In Eastern Canada, the Atlantic Loop will transform the energy market as it has been labeled a top regional priority. The concept of the Atlantic Loop is to upgrade transmission capacity to allow hydroelectric power from Labrador and Quebec to displace coal use. Renewables such as solar power generation and wind and hydroelectric projects are an important part of the balanced energy mix along with nuclear power. And one additional comment, the energy industry should focus on delivering infrastructure that is future ready, assets and systems that can be readily adapted, repurposed, or retired as technology changes and evolves. To wrap up, I believe the future will include escalating aspects of a green circular economy that recognizes the interconnectedness of how we operate as companies, as communities, countries, and globally. Thank you very much for inviting me to give my thoughts. Stay safe. Merci beaucoup à tous. And now, back to you.
So that was John Beck from ECON. Monsieur Clamadieu.
Well, again, I think it echoes what we were saying earlier on, and I see really a stronger and stronger alignment between corporation and our stakeholders across the globe. Maybe two comments on John's words. First one, the need to create infrastructure which will allow us to have interconnected energy systems where different types of energy will complement each other. And yes, indeed, I believe that renewable in the form of hydro and solar are very well complemented by hydro. We see that in our own on our own portfolio. Very well complemented by gas, because gas today is the best way to produce the electricity which is needed when renewables are not operating, when you don't have sun or wind. And then he mentioned also the importance to have infrastructure which could be reused in different concepts. And this is the way we see our own gas infrastructure. Today we are using our gas infrastructure to transport natural gas. Tomorrow it will be biogas produced by fermentation of various types of renewable inputs. And the day after, it will be used to transport and to store hydrogen. And I think this is very important to think forward and to see how you can use your various systems in an energy mix which is changing. And maybe a second comment, he talked about sustainability reporting, and I see that this is becoming more and more a subject of discussion with investors. Some years ago, it was when you were a CEO doing roadshows, you had the feeling that the sustainability issues were talked once every 10 meetings. Now it's really a feature in almost all the interaction we have with investors. People are still struggling to understand how you should report and how you can challenge a corporation regarding its sustainability performance. But this discussion happens today in most of our interaction with shareholders, and I think this is also a game changer. And it creates the need to develop a common language to discuss about sustainability performance. And there we still have a long way to go, because there's a lot of different frameworks which are developed here and there. We see governments willing to put regulation in place by countries. We have one in France, there was one in Germany. EU wants to come with its own scheme. So it's a little bit complex today for corporations to understand how they should report. And I think it's important that we develop the IFRS of sustainability, if I can use this image. Not easy, because sustainability is pretty complex to grasp. And by the way, the reference John made about the UN sustainability goal is a very important one, because this could be the basis for these types of reporting, but certainly an area where we need to work with investors to develop this common framework.
When you talk about sustainability reporting, I understand that your investors are putting pressure on ENGIE, and you've engaged a dialogue. But are you also, as ENGIE, putting pressure on your customers? For instance, you mentioned some GAFAs you're working with. You mentioned a big customer, and I was just wondering, how do you tell them it's going to improve your sustainability, not only your sustainability operations, but also your reporting? It's going to be scrutinized more and more.
We are not there to put pressure on our customers, but we are there to tell them what's happening around them and to show that the way as they engage into a demanding energy transition scenario, there's a number of payback, if I can say that, immediate usually for their P&L, because once you consume less energy, it creates a positive impact on your P&L. It creates engagement with employees, very impressive, and then it's a subject of discussion with your investors. So what we are trying to do, and it really depends, we have some customers which are incredibly sophisticated and they don't need us to figure that. Others are listening very carefully to what we can say on this. And yes, indeed, I think there's a lot of opportunities to share experiences within the business communities between suppliers, customers, and people who participate in the same supply chains and ecosystems.
Okay. So our next intervention is from Arnold Donald. He's the CEO of Carnival Corporation.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to thank Nicolas Remillard and his International Economic Forum team for organizing this conference of Paris. And I'm very sorry that I'm not able to participate in the live part of the meeting. But I am so very glad to see that despite the chaos around the world right now, we're still able to focus on what is perhaps the top priority of our time, moving towards a greener, more sustainable future for our world. Now, while our company's footprint and the footprint of our industry is relatively small, we must do our part to help address the serious threat that is global climate change. As a global travel and leisure company with ships that sail to all 7 continents, for us, that means our highest responsibility and our top priority are always compliance, environmental protection, and the health, safety, and well-being of our guests, of the people in the communities that we touch, and our employees, our Carnival family, both shipboard and shoreside. Now, the COVID-19 crisis, of course, has been devastating to the travel industry as a whole, and especially to the cruise industry. But this pause, and I'm sure it's the same for many of us, has had a silver lining in the sense it's allowed us to focus our attention on those things we can control going forward. At Carnival Corporation and our world's leading cruise lines, AIDA, Carnival, Costa, Cunard, P&O UK, Seabourn, Princess, Holland America, and P&O Australia, we are accelerating our sustainability plan, and we are removing ships from our fleet that are less efficient and have less advanced environmental systems. A number of these ships are being dismantled in shipyards in Turkey. And while those ships provided so many happy memories for millions of people through the decades, these are really giant recycling projects, undertaken in our case with independent third-party oversight, as the individual parts on these ships are being upcycled or melted for other uses. Just like a car or a TV or a computer, our ships have a life cycle, and as we recycle the older, less efficient ships, we are also building newer, much more advanced ships with greater ability to be sustainable and with a lower environmental impact. Now, we continue to incorporate newer, cleaner fuel sources like LNG, and we continue to investigate early stages of research into alternate energy forms like fuel cells and battery power, which will benefit not just the cruise industry, but the shipping industry as a whole. Since 2005, we've reduced our carbon footprint by 29%. And we have a 2030 goal of a 40% reduction relative to our 2008 baseline, with an aspirational goal of zero emissions in the future. COVID-19 has also sharpened our focus on life's priorities. And for many of us, travel is a big priority. And so we're anxious to pull out our suitcases again and search for our passports. I know I am. Now, more than ever, it's helped bring all parts of the travel industry together and helped us recognize our dependence and reliance on each other as partners and to work together to build sustainable destinations within a healthy global environment. It's shown us that we cannot take anything for granted. And that includes, of course, clean air, clean water, healthy oceans, and a prospering planet. So, my question for the speaker is this. How has COVID-19 changed or sped up or perhaps slowed down the strategic environmental plans for your company? Thank you for allowing me this time, and please have a great conference.
So that was Arnold from Carnival Corporation. So are you looking to go back on a cruise, Monsieur Clamadieu? And what kind of a cruise would it be? Would it be a green cruise?
I hope it would.
Sailing?
Sailing would be great. No, in fact, regarding travel, I think there's two parts of me. From a personal standpoint, yes, I'm really willing to have again the opportunity to travel, to go with my kids, to visit countries, discover things together. I mean, that's an experience that I enjoyed very much over the past few years. I'm really looking forward to do it again. In my life as a businessman, a number of things have changed, and I don't think we will go back to our way of working pre-COVID. For me, that's obvious. And yes, I'm also looking forward for opportunities to meet teams face to face, to hire people, not through video conferences, but with a direct face-to-face interview. But I think the time where you would travel from Paris to New York for an afternoon meeting and a dinner is over. I think we've realized that a lot of things can be done remotely, and that when you have to travel, you have to make the best use of it. So for me, that's one of the interesting takeout point from this crisis. It's not to restart as quickly as possible the way we used to work before. So I think for the travel industry, you know that I'm also a board member of Airbus, which is part of the travel industry, building planes. I think there's a lot of food for thoughts. Life won't go back as it used to be before this crisis, and I'm sure that for companies, the ability to perform a number of tasks remotely has become more obvious. Don't draw the conclusion that I'm a big fan of home working and that I think a company can work with 100% of its employees working from home. This is what we do currently at ENGIE. I mean, since last week with the second confinement in Paris, we had on Friday less than 100 people in our big tower in La Défense, where we used to host 3,000 to 4,000 people. This is temporary. We don't know how long it will last. And at some point of time, we need to bring people back together. But again, probably with different ways of working. So I think we'll learn a number of lessons out of this crisis when it comes to how you organize corporate life.
Well, I felt the intervention of Arnold was actually quite interesting, because the shipping industry, and not just the cruise industry, but the shipping industry as well, has proven as like very carbon emitting, and was actually somehow, and forgive me, Mr. Donald, for saying this, was the villain at some point. So are you working with them? You have customers, and what do they expect?
No, what was very interesting in his presentation was a very comprehensive approach. From the dismantling of boat,
absolutely,
what type of fuel you use to power your cruise ship. Yes, we are working with Rodolphe Sade, that you probably know. He has absolutely. He has developed an alliance with a number of players in this field. We are part of this alliance. We work on providing cleaner fuels. Natural gas is indeed a key candidate to replace diesel fuel to power large shipping boats. Tomorrow we can think of hydrogen once again as a source of energy for boats. So and to do that, if you think of using LNG to supply boats, you need to have service station, if I can use this image, refilling station. And we have been working to create this type of system in the Mediterranean Sea, in the southern part of France, to allow ships to access natural gas, because there's already a number of ships using natural gas, and this is another industry with which we are working to help them develop their own energy transition scenario.
Our last intervention is from Afsaneh Beschloss, and she's the CEO of RockCreek Group. Afsaneh, we are very fortunate to have you today. Thank you so much for being here with us. I leave you the floor. Go ahead.
So I wanted to first thank Nicolas Samoyard for inviting me to this conference, and very, very excited to be part of this conversation with Jean-Pierre in terms of talking about the global economy, but the role of a low-carbon global economy. And as you were talking a little earlier, and as I was listening to the conversations, I think we all know that as COVID is slowing down the economy in Europe and the US, maybe a little bit less in North Asia, but the rest of emerging markets, what we've been talking about is extremely important, because on the one hand, delaying action on climate will further expose us to slower growth in general, but also it will increase the risks that we've been talking about in terms of climate impact, air pollution, health issues. And a low carbon technology, as we know, as you've been talking about, has become very, very much more cost competitive. And at RockCreek, where we continue to invest in low carbon technologies, what we're finding is that in Europe, emerging markets, and in the US, we can really deploy resources to help not only get to new heights in green technology, but also to create jobs. And whether this continues will obviously depend on how governments respond to not just the COVID crisis, but how they continue to invest in this green economy. I think one of the other things that is very interesting is that the cost of climate change will increase, as we know, the longer we leave it. And our studies show that the impact on the global economy could be anything from 1% to 3%, if not more, over the next 10 to 20 years. On the other hand, we also know that renewable energy, as you've been talking, and storage are cost competitive with fossil fuels already. And led by wind and solar energy, just in the US, clean energy climbed to a record of $78 billion in terms of investments in 2019. And even post-COVID, the investments in green technology have continued to be really, really important. The last thing I wanted to say is that, very importantly, green technology can also help us with a job-creating economy, both in Europe, as you have shown, as well as in the US. And I wanted to ask, if I may, Jean-Pierre, whether you think, now that in the US we have had this election, and news came out over the weekend, as you know, that President-elect Biden is going to be taking over in January. And one of the most important pillars of his statements, as you know, was getting back into the Paris Accord. How do you feel that will change things, the US rejoining the Paris Accord? And how will that also impact China, which is another major large part of the global economy? Will the fact that the US join the Paris Climate Accord also impact China?
Well, that's a very interesting and challenging question. We should remember that in the COP21 in Paris, one of the important events which made this COP a success was an agreement between China and the US. The fact that China and the US came saying we are willing to support some form of agreement, and we can discuss and say that the Paris Agreement is not perfect, but it was a major step forward. So yes, indeed, China and the US at the time were able to make a joint statement making or helping make this COP a success. Probably a bit more difficult today, because even with a new president-elect, I think China and the US are probably in a relationship which is tense. This being said, China made an announcement a few weeks ago saying that they are aiming at carbon neutrality in 2060, while other economies, Europe is targeting 2050, so it will take a bit more time, but I think it's a very interesting statement. And I see on the ground, when I discuss with our own people in China, when I discuss with other companies which are operating in China, when I discuss with Chinese officials, I think China is willing clearly to move in this direction. As far as the ultimate goal is concerned, short term, they still rely too much on fossil fuel, mostly coal, and we have a real difficulties to phase out coal, and this is probably the immediate challenge that they are facing. But on a number of other issues, China is moving. Think of electric vehicle. We are all talking in the Western world about Tesla, but think of BYD, a very large Chinese company which is developing electric vehicle. If you tour Chinese cities, you see probably more electric buses than you would see in our cities in Western Europe. So China is moving, and what's very important is that we recreate the ability for large global powers to work together in this field. And this is why the decision of President-elect Biden to go back into the Paris Agreement is so important. We need to tackle this challenge all together. It can't be done by Europe on its own. Europe is 15% of global carbon emission. It can't be done by the US alone. It can't be done by China or India alone. We have to work together. Understanding the differences, we don't have the same history, we are not starting from the same situation, but we need to go in the same direction. And so yes, I think that the decision of the fact that the President-elect Biden is willing to go back into the Paris Agreement is very important. The fact that China is setting targets which are not exactly the one we would like them to set, but going in this direction, all of this gives me confidence that in 2021, we should see signs that the world is once again aligning its efforts to fight this incredible challenge.
Afsaneh, thank you so much for your participation. Thank you very, very much. You brought up the last points of this conference. Thank you very much again. And take good care of yourself.
Merci beaucoup à tous. Merci beaucoup à tous.
Merci.
Merci. There you go. You mentioned it. Let me, for the benefit of our audience, briefly sum what you and I and others have discussed. So COVID has been a catalyst, and notably for ENGIE, which actually was already very much engaged in green services, for instance. This certainly for ENGIE triggered an acceleration in strategy over two pillars. One is renewables, investing there, and energy infrastructures. And you did say, because I had to ask the question, M&A is certainly not the priority here. It's to develop this organically. Working closely with customers is something that you've been doing. And these customers are more and more aware of the need to actually embrace green recovery. And you said actually, some of your customers are extremely sophisticated in that point, and you mentioned GAFAs, for instance. We talked about the stimuluses, and there are stimuluses across the world, and as you know, the EU decided a package. There are delays in implementing them, but that's your point, Monsieur Clamadieu. Your point was we need more speed, we need more coordination. One thing is being done in France, another one in Germany, and another one in Spain. Good coordination could probably help perhaps tackle the bureaucratic hurdles, but certainly pave the way for something smoother and more aligned. And we had the great interventions of Glenn Hutchins from the Brookings Institution, who raised the point that in the US, for instance, the US corporations and local governments haven't waited for a federal government that was not committed to act. And he also echoed what you were discussing about energy infrastructure, the need for energy infrastructures. And we talked also about the workforce. A skilled workforce is needed. And at ENGIE, you've been training people for the new competencies that will be developed as we discover new technologies and we implement them. We also had John Beck from ECON, and he reinforced that discussion about the infrastructures. And he also raised the point that we might want to be able to reuse them. And this is definitely something that you have in mind at ENGIE. He also brought up the goal of sustainability reporting, and that's an interesting one. You did mention that your investors are really keen on seeing ENGIE, doing more in that respect. And at the same time, you also said that not only are you very much aware and doing this, but you have fostered a dialogue with your customers. Again, some of them extremely sophisticated and not waiting for you to embrace sustainability reporting. At the same time, you pointed out, as much as the stimuluses are certainly not coordinated as much as they should be, it's the same for sustainability standard. There's one, the UN sustainability goal. There's one in France, there's one in Germany, and the EU is probably trying to do something on its own as well. So you called for some sort of a standard across the globe, and you're involved actually across the globe. Then we had Arnold intervention, and that's an interesting point because he brought up the travel industry point of view, Carnival Corporation, the cruises. We talked about the freight, and you said that business travel will probably not be what it used to be. You won't make a day trip between Paris and New York anymore, probably. There will be leisure travel, of course, but not so much for business. Cleaner fuels, of course, are needed, especially in that industry, in that shipping industry. And you also mentioned hydrogen. Throughout this discussion, you said hydrogen might definitely be the key in the entire globe lowering its carbon emissions. We had, of course, Afsaneh Beschloss. She's the CEO of RockCreek Group, and you have that discussion about China and the new US administration coming up at the end of January next year. And you said there's hope. There's hope because the president-elect pledged for the US to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. And you mentioned China, finally, which is also willing to move. They've set up some goals, a bit on the longer term compared to the rest of the world. But it doesn't matter. The principle is there because Europe is only 15% of the carbon emissions, you said, and then we need everyone. Did I sum it up well?
It was great, Géraldine. Thank you very much.
Do you want to say anything more about...
No, I think after this summary, it would be useless. Again, probably, let's be optimistic. We are facing a very severe health crisis. The vaccine is probably in sight. It might take months, but it's probably in sight. The next big challenge is the climate crisis, and it will arrive. It will come more slowly than the health crisis, but the impact could be even more detrimental. So let's prepare for it. Let's make sure we collectively fight against climate change. There's a lot of hope today that technologies, government support, corporate strategies can be aligned to allow us, and I should probably say, collective behaviors of the inhabitants of this planet. We could all align the energy to avoid falling into this trap.
I was very, very fortunate to have this discussion with you, Monsieur Clamadieu. He's the chairman of ENGIE, and I hope you enjoyed this. I certainly did. Take good care of yourself.